What's good, my tribe? This is day 50 of the 90-day YouTube challenge. So yesterday I shared the fact that I was reading the book by Rick Strassman, DMT and the Soul of Prophecy. And in it kind of expounds this idea of the two poles of spiritual experience, sort of the one hand being a mystical unitive experience, which is more along the lines of the goals of the Eastern spiritual and mystical traditions. And then on the other hand, this more interactive relational experience, which more closely is actually aligned with some of the Western spiritual traditions, such as the Hebrew Bible, and also, according to Rick Strassman, more aligns with some of the psychedelic experiences found through DMT. And so I thought a good kind of segue from there to my own practice and experience with this would be sort of discussing my newfound interest of the Western esoteric traditions. So this is something that a lot of people are actually coming to nowadays. It's definitely growing in popularity. We're seeing a rise in people studying magic and witchcraft, especially amongst the younger crowd. And so I thought I'd talk a little bit about that, and because this is something that I have been very interested in recently as well. So for me, it's always been, I started off looking into the Eastern traditions, looking into yoga, Buddhism, and meditation. And so for me, it was always this one pole of trying to access that mystical unitive state, that state of samadhi, that state that I touched upon in my early psychedelic experiences, where I felt like I was just at one with the entire universe, and I had dissolved my sense of individuality with the larger universe. And so, along with achieving that and sort of aiming for that, some of the other parts of my spiritual journey and the goals that I've had have been to kind of achieve communication with entities, with spirits, and achieve what's known as astral projection, astral travel, being able to leave the body to visit these other realms, again, to either gather information, to speak with other entities, or just to kind of explore. And so this is why I've been kind of more interested in the Western esoteric tradition, which I guess you could say, as an umbrella term, is magic. So what is magic? You could say a good definition of occult magic. Occult actually just means hidden. So it comes from the Latin term occultus, and it's basically anything occult is that which is outside of the framework of mainstream religion or science. So it's that which is secret and has been sort of kept hidden from the mainstream and the public. And then magic could be seen as this, or sort of an art of creating change in the world in accordance with your will. This is a definition that was given by one of the most famous magicians, Aleister Crowley. And then Stephen Skinner, I think, kind of expounds upon that and adds in, this is done through communication with spiritual entities. And we try to connect and communicate and persuade spiritual entities to help us through the use of sacred words and names and symbols such as sigils, incense, offerings, sometimes sacrifices, especially sort of in the olden times, and just other magical materials. And so this is, what has been in the Western tradition. Of course, there's some overlap between the East and the West. Many Eastern traditions use magical items and try to talk to deities and try to ask them for their blessing. It's not just, the Western tradition. However, the Western tradition is, more along the lines of, again, kind of going back to the book, this sort of interactional and relational spiritual experience. So you could say that the Western esoteric tradition really has its origins in something that's called the Greco-Egyptian papyri. And these are essentially a collection of scrolls dating from, I believe, the 5th century BC all the way up to the 5th century AD. So kind of about a decade early on. And I think even earlier than that, a lot of these techniques actually originated from ancient Sumeria and were sort of passed down in these mystery schools and traditions. And so, yeah, I mean, this has since kind of evolved and been passed down through various scrolls and grimoires, which are kind of these magical books, and have sort of developed over time. But there's a lot of things that have actually surprisingly kind of stayed the same, sort of formulas that are used in this sort of world of magic, and they're still surviving and used to this day. And so a couple things that we can talk about as far as the occult magic in the Western tradition. We have this idea of Goetia versus Theurgy. And so the Goetia is more along the lines of trying to invoke spiritual entities to achieve more material means. So this would be invoking entities to help with finding a partner, finding love, manifesting wealth and power. And then on the other hand, we have Theurgy, which is essentially, it's known as God working. And the idea of Theurgy is to invoke higher spirits to raise one's consciousness to the point where you are able to directly engage and communicate with God, the divine mind, or the universal spiritual matrix, whatever you want to call it. So these are sort of the two poles of occult magic, the Goetia and Theurgy. And the other sort of binary thing that I'd like to talk about in regards to this subject is the idea of high magic versus low magic. So low magic, when we say high and low, we don't mean one is better than the other. What it actually refers to is actually the class of people that would engage in these practices. So low magic usually is associated with the more poor class or the underclass, the working class. And so a lot of the techniques from low magic are actually passed down orally through families, and it often uses more natural materials. So a lot of the natural magic using herbs and incense and various spells that kind of rhyme. These are things that are in the realm of low magic. On the other hand, we have high magic, which was usually practiced by the elite class, the ones that could actually read and write, and they would study these grimoires and ancient texts and be able to apply more rigid sort of formulas and practices to their ritual. And so, yeah, I think that's a good place to stop for now, but that's I think a good little introduction into this Western esoteric mystery tradition. The idea of kind of trying to access this communication and engage directly with spirits and other entities, this more interactional, relational type of spiritual experience, compared to most of the Eastern practices, which are really associated with trying to achieve a sort of mystical union, trying to dissolve the ego, dissolve the mind, and the sense of self. So, yeah, I think it's a good place to stop for now. So I just wanted to thank you all for listening. Thank you for joining me. as always, I hope you are well, with love and light. May peace be with you.